G'day, and welcome to the Sea Creatures podcast, a show all about the amazing animals that live beneath the waves. Each episode, we chat about a specific sea creature with a guest who has spent time and interact with this ocean animal. Our guests range from scuba divers to marine biologists, citizen scientists, underwater photographers, and anyone who has an intense passion for marine life. My name's Matt Testoni, and I'm all of the above. And joining me for this episode of the Sea Creatures podcast is Scott Morrissey, and he's a marine biologist from JCU, currently doing his PhD on jellyfish. And that's what we're going to be talking all about today, jellyfish, and hopefully a little bit about the infamous box jellyfish. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So how did you come to be involved in jellyfish and studying jellyfish? Did you just fall into it, or was it something that you kind of aspired to?
Well, I kind of just fell into it. At the end of my undergrad, I was looking for an honors project and I had no clue as to what I'd like to study. I just couldn't make up my mind, as I found everything underwater to be so incredibly interesting. And it wasn't until I spoke to one of my professors, Mike Kingsford, who is actually one of my supervisors today for my PhD, that I decided to study jellyfish, specifically box jellyfish. And ever since then, I've just become more and more intrigued by them, as there is a lot we don't know about these animals.
Yeah, I was doing a bit of research before the show and I was blown away by just how complex they are and some of the amazing little facts you find out about them. But start us off and tell us, what exactly is a jellyfish?
Well, jellyfish are not just the animal you see swimming around the ocean or washed up on the beach. They have quite a complex life cycle, which has three main stages. Now, the first stage is right at the beginning of the jellyfish's life, just after an egg and a sperm meet and fuse. And this stage is the planular stage. And what it is an absolutely tiny, about 0.5 millimeter in size, pill-shaped larvae. Now, for this larvae to move onto the next stage of its life, it needs to find a nice, safe place where it can park up and settle down. And so it'll swim around the water until it finds such a place. Now, once it settles, we are at the beginning of the next stage, the polyp stage. Now, believe it or not, this stage is actually the dominant, most persistent stage of a jellyfish. Polyps can live for several years. And the easiest way to describe a polyp is as a tiny microscopic sea anemone, or as a tiny little jellyfish which has been flipped upside down and is kind of stuck to the sea floor. They're around 1 to 2 millimeters in size, so they're really quite tiny. Now, during this stage, the polyps undertake asexual reproduction. So they're essentially cloning themselves to increase their numbers. And this can occur by them splitting themselves in half, or they move very slowly along the ocean floor. And while they do so, they leave a little footprint of cells behind, and those cells can grow into another polyp individual. And this polyp stage, despite it being the most persistent stage, is actually quite understudied. And this is mainly due to the challenges associated with finding them. For example, of all the box jellyfish species, which is about 50, polyps have only been located twice worldwide ever. And the understanding we have surrounding this stage mostly comes from polyps which have been successfully raised in a lab. And that itself isn't an easy feat for most species. Now, once conditions are ideal, the polyps will start to bud off a part of themselves. And that grows up to be the medusa stage, the stage we're all familiar with. And a single polyp can produce from 1 to 30, 40 plus medusae, potentially hundreds. If you have a bed of polyps with a large number of individuals, this is how you end up with massive blooms of jellyfish. So the polyp stage, which we know little about and have a hard time finding, are the source medusae. So if we can work out where they are, then it will open the door to really understanding, population structures, dynamics of these animals.
Wow, that's yeah. Sorry, I just have to kind of get that into my head. So you've got a tiny larvae, it settles on the ground, and it grows into when you look at kind of the drawings, they kind of look like almost like a flower, and then it's the equivalent of this flower growing and then detaching hundreds of flowers, which then go off to be their own jellyfish. That's crazy, because that was one of the questions I had. How many jellyfish will a polyp make?
Yeah, well, it depends Like a lot of stuff around jellyfish, we don't really know because it's all polyps in a lab, which could be different to what's actually happening in the wild. Actually, for a lot of us, when we work with jellyfish, we'll have polyp cultures in our labs, and to get them to bud and become a medusae, well, we got to add this chemical, and it causes them to strobulate and produce medusae. But for scyphozoan jellyfish, which are your general jellyfish, it could be 30, 40, could be 100, medusae per polyp. For box jellyfish, however, it's one. So one polyp gives you one medusa.
Wow. And so box jellyfish, you mentioned their polyps are like a few millimeters. But what about like really big jellyfish you see? Are they the same polyp size, and then the jellyfish just grows that big? How does it work?
Yeah, so the polyps are all around around the same size, like 1 to 2 millimeters. They might be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, but jellyfish have the ability to grow quite rapidly. For the species I work with, the Australian box jellyfish, it can go from being, the tiny little polyp to a full-sized adult in a matter of months. They're like 95% water. So if they eat a lot and get a big meal, they can grow quite quickly.
Yeah, and so what are they feeding on? What are and all jellyfish feed on the same thing, or they've got different diets?
It depends. It depends. Some jellyfish will, just feed on shrimp or other plankton. Some jellyfish have algae that live in their tentacles, so they can photosynthesize and get food that way.
Whoa.
Some jellyfish eat other jellyfish.
How does a jellyfish eat another jellyfish? Like, what's the mechanism? How does it happen?
So, like a lion's mane jellyfish, which is one of your bigger jellyfish, they get huge. It'll generally eat moon jellies, and so moon jellies get caught up in its tentacles, and it'll pull it into its mouth, I guess. Its mouth is also its anus. But essentially, they put the jellyfish inside themselves to manipulate it with their tentacles, and then the jellyfish, while it's inside, they just dissolves essentially, and the jellyfish absorbs all that at once, and then releases everything that it doesn't need.
Wow. And I mean, speaking of the lion's mane, I think, is that the longest animal in the world? I think.
Ooh, I know that the lion's mane, the largest individual they found was to be 2 meters wide, which is ridiculous. Like, I'm not 2 meters, but if I lay down sideways and this jellyfish is wider than me, that's insane. But I know in that same individual, they found it to have tentacles reaching 36 meters in length, which is just insane. Like, if you're a poor scuba diver, and you're going to probably get tangled up pretty quickly if you're anywhere near that.
Yeah, get dragged into, I mean, you'd almost, that's got to be feeding on even big fish, wouldn't it, if they get caught up?
Yeah, a lot of fish actually use jellyfish as shelter and as protection. There's some really cool images out there of, I think it's trevally, that have like wedged themselves inside the jellyfish and are swimming along using it as protection, which is really strange, but really cool.
Yeah, and I know I've seen a few big Haeckel's jellyfish and blue blubber jellyfish with little colonies of different leather jackets living all among them. It's really, really cool sight.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the polyps, but where do jellyfish live, and how deep do jellyfish go and these polyps? Are they on the bottom of the seafloor, like 1,000 meters down, or what do we know?
Well, regarding the polyps, we don't really know. For some species, we find them on rocks or on the underside of rocks where they're protected, or in shells, like old bivalve shells. Some species, their polyps are really thriving on artificial structures we're putting into lakes, rivers, into ports and that. And there's some research going on at the minute out of China, and they're trying to work out how to stop all the polyps attaching to the artificial structures to try and reduce the huge blooms that they're getting. But the medusa can occur pretty much anywhere, in warm waters, cold waters, shallow waters. I know that NOAA, when they send down their submersibles and that, they find jellies at 2,500 meters deep, which is insane. Pretty much, if there's water and things can live in it, there'll be a jellyfish there, I'm sure.
Yeah. Wow. And I think one thing that I found amazing about jellyfish, because talking about how they live at different depths, you kind of go, well, how do they know where to swim? But they actually have different levels of kind of eyesight in a way, don't they?
Yeah, indeed. A lot of jellyfish just have standard like light sense eyes, so they can tell if it's light or if it's dark. So with box jellies, they actually have pretty complex eyes. They have 24 eyes, 6 on each side, and 8 of them are compound eyes, and they can make out images. So it allows them to move through complex habitats like mangrove forests without getting caught on all the intricate root systems, which is really, really cool.
Wow. So their eyes, you reckon, are primarily used for navigation, not for hunting per se. They kind of just drift onto their prey, but they navigate with these eyes.
Yeah. Just so, if like a jellyfish, if you get caught on something, your bell will tear, and yeah, that's pretty much the end of things, unfortunately. So it's advantage to, be able to avoid all these sharp objects.
Yeah. And so you mentioned like really early on that jellyfish reproduce with sperm and eggs. But the question I always have is, how do they know when to do this and when there's another jellyfish around to do it?
Well, jellyfish communicate via, releasing chemical cues. So there is probably a chemical or a cue that they release to tell everyone around them, hey, I want to reproduce, let's all reproduce. But we're actually not really sure. There's a lot that we don't know. Like, we don't know when a polyp is turning into a medusa. We have no idea what the signal is to get them to start. Same with reproducing. There's a lot we don't know, a lot of unanswered questions that we're trying to answer.
Okay, and so how many types, or how many species and how many types of jellyfish are there?
So there are 4 main types of jellyfish. The first type is a relatively new type, and these are the staurozoans, or commonly called the stalk jellyfish. And there are around 50 species of this type. And they actually spend their whole lives living on the ocean floor. And you typically find these jellies in colder waters, close to shore, and they look nothing like you think a jellyfish would. I once heard someone describe them as a wine glass with pom-poms around the top of the glass, which sounds really weird, but everyone listening should definitely look them up because they're really, really cool.
I love it, wine glass.
They're awesome. The stalk jellyfish, yeah. Then the next type is the most diverse type of jellyfish, having around 3,000 species. And these are the hydrozoans. And most of these jellies are quite small and they don't usually sting. An example of one of these jellies, which people might remember from biology class, is Hydra, which is a freshwater hydrozoan. And if you've ever seen pictures of some of the deep sea jellyfish, for example, the firework jellyfish, which is stunning, the majority of them are hydrozoan jellies. There is one type of hydrozoan jelly, actually, which I think is incredibly interesting, and that's the immortal jellyfish, which, as its name suggests, is biologically immortal. So it doesn't die. It can change its old cells back into new ones, and this process can go on indefinitely. And so there's a lot of interest surrounding this species in aging, pharmaceutical, and stem cell research.
So just like with the immortal jellyfish, I heard that it changes its life cycle from that medusa, that kind of main jellyfish phase we know, back to the polyp, and then back into the medusa bell. But does it produces clones of itself? And is it truly immortal, do you think? Or is it just kind of like dropping off arms and then the arms grow and then, that kind of thing?
So it does both. It definitely can revert back to its younger self. But yeah, they're certainly biologically immortal. And yeah, cloning themselves is a backup to that.
Wow. That's a pretty amazing thing. Anyway, keep going and tell us more about the different species or the different types.
So the next type is what most people think of when you hear someone talking about a jellyfish, and these are the scyphozoan jellyfish, or the true jellyfish. And these jellies are what you typically see in aquariums, as they are charismatic and they're a range of colors, shapes, sizes. And some of these can get huge sizes, like the lion's mane jellyfish, which we discussed earlier. And included in this scyphozoan group, you have the moon jellies, which I think every aquarium has because they're such widespread jellyfish genera. And also, speaking of moon jellies, they're actually the lab rat of jellyfish research. I think they're the easiest jellyfish species to care for, and that's why they're the lab rat.
Wow! And so in the lab for moon jellyfish, are you getting them to do the polyp stage and they grow up into the medusa stage and over again? Or like, are you breeding them in the lab?
Yeah. People can successfully rear them in the lab and have their polyps. Yeah, polyps are pretty easy to care for. I'm just going to make sure their water's clean and that they're happily fed. And then the Medusa stage of moon jellies is also quite easy as long as the water's clean. Other species of jellyfish, though, are quite difficult to keep. It is a challenge. If the water's slightly dirty or if the pH is slightly out, they're done. They'll just call it a day.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, just the idea of a jellyfish aquarium seems so much more exciting than a normal aquarium to me, anyway.
Yeah. Well, there's a really cool aquarium and research facility down the Gold Coast at SeaWorld run by Professor Kylie Pitt. So if you're ever at Gold Coast, definitely check it out. It's really, really cool. And you can actually see all of her students and her workers in that working behind the scenes, working on the jellyfish, which is really cool.
Cool. And so was that the final type of jellyfish, or is there one more?
So there's one more, and it's my favorite, and it's the box jellyfish, of course. I'm probably the only person in the world, or one of the only people in the world, who gets excited to see them. Everyone, when they hear box jellyfish, they run for the hills. But I think they're incredibly interesting, and they're probably the most evolved of all the types of jellyfish. They have great mobility and they're capable of strong directional swimming, so they can move against currents. So they don't just go with the flow like some of their scyphozoan relatives. And, they have their complex eyes, so they can make out images and move through those mangrove roots. And of course, they're famous for their sting. Box jellies have some of the most potent venom in the animal kingdom. And the Australian box jellyfish, which is actually my research species, is the most venomous animal in the ocean and potentially on the planet. A full-grown adult has enough venom to kill 60 adult humans, which is just insane and terrifying.
So not all box jellyfish are poisonous, though, are they?
No, some have milder stings, like Copulus sevakisi, which is this tiny little box jellyfish, probably the size of your thumbnail. Its stings are it still stings, but it's not terribly painful. It's not gonna hurt you. But a lot of species do hurt. You have box jellyfish, like the Australian box jellyfish, which have killed people, and then you have irukandji jellyfish, which have the nastiest sting. I never want to experience that, and I hope no one listening does. And if you want, I can describe the whole process of that sting.
Yeah. First of all, how big are irukandji and Australian box jellyfish? How big are the deadly kinds?
So Australian box jellyfish, it varies, but the biggest ones you'll probably find 15 to 20 centimeters wide, and then you'll have tentacles up to 3 meters long when they're fully extended. That's quite a big animal, and you only need, if you're swimming and you swim straight into its tentacles across your chest, you're going to be having a pretty rough time. You should get to the hospital pretty quick. It's not going to be good.
Yeah, because there's not that many deaths each year, or not that many encounters with them, are there?
No, not here in Australia. We're quite lucky. Unfortunately, the most recent one was last stinger season. In total, since we started recording them, there's only been around 60 deaths in Australia. But, in other countries, such as the Philippines, where, they don't have stinger nets, they don't have, education for how to not get stung and how to stay away from stingers, the number of deaths is significantly higher. And in those countries, it's quite a concern, actually.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed we never see one out scuba diving.
Well, I want to see them. Yeah.
In a full stinger suit with a face mask on, I hope. But tell us about the mechanism. What happens when you get stung by the jellyfish?
So along their tentacles, they have these cells called nematocysts, and they're when you brush up against the tentacle, there's a little hair, and it needs mechanical and chemical stimulation. Just brushing your arm, your leg will do that. And what happens is a little harpoon comes shooting out of the cell into your skin that injects the venom, which is nuts. It's really cool. A lot of people study it. There's some really cool videos of you can see the nematocyst firing. It's super cool.
Wow. And so that nematocyst stays in you? That's what the jellyfish leaves it behind? Once it's fired into you?
Yeah, so it can be there, but after you put vinegar on, it all comes out eventually.
Okay, so it fires into you, and then what happens?
So it fires into you, and then the jellyfish will inject the venom into you. Now, when you get done, it's unlikely that all of the nematocysts on that tentacle have fired. So it's very important to make sure that you aren't just ripping it off or trying to scrape it off, use the vinegar or wash it off with the seawater. But yeah, don't just pull it off.
Yeah, and what does vinegar do to the poison? Why is vinegar better than water?
So if there's any unfired nematocysts, it'll just stop them from being able to fire. It'll deactivate them essentially. And so, you don't want to be pulling off tentacle or dealing with tentacle that's still got unfired nematocysts, because you don't want people helping you get stung in that. So it's just important to use the vinegar.
So the vinegar kind of neutralizes these nematocysts. Is that correct?
Yeah. It stops them from firing. Yeah.
Okay, but if you've already got the poison in you, the vinegar isn't helping. Is that correct?
No. The vinegar prevents anything else from firing off. But yeah, if you've been done with a decent amount of tentacles and you've got a high venom load being injected into you, you need to call for help and get to the hospital as quick as you can.
Yeah.
But fortunately, there is actually an anti-venom out now for the Australian box jellyfish, which is good.
So if you do get kind of like a medium sting and you can get to the hospital, you'll probably be okay these days. That's good to know.
Yeah, you should be fine. Like if you get done and you're at a beach and there's other people around, you should be able to get to the hospital and you should be okay.
Yeah. And so when you're going to collect your box jellyfish, you're way out on the reef. How do you do it? And what kind of safety precautions? And has there ever been stings, or how does it all work?
With all jellyfish work, we're gloved up, we're wearing full wetsuits, everything is covered. We have a heap of vinegar. We have some other products called Sting No More, which is a really cool product that stops the sting. It's quite unlikely that we'll get stung out there while we're working, because we have every possible safety measure in place. And the last thing you want is to get stung, out in the boat in the middle of nowhere. Would not be fun time for anyone.
Yeah. And how do you collect box jellyfish? Or like you set out on the boat and do you know where they're going to be? Use a net? How does that work?
Yeah, well, box jellyfish themselves are quite spatially dispersed, which makes finding them quite a challenge. But the easiest way to find them is you can either, drag out a net and drag the net along the beach there for, 100 or so meters, and you'd probably catch, 1-2 individuals if you know that they occur there. Or another technique we use, which I'm actually going to use tonight when I go out into the field, is we get a really bright underwater light and we lower it down off the boat and we leave it there for half an hour. And any jellyfish or, any little critter that's attracted to light will come towards it. And so what we do is we just wait for them to turn up to the boat and scoop them out with our net and put them in a bucket. So they do all the work for us, which is nice.
Yeah, well, that's actually a little bit scary, because I know one of the big trends in diving and underwater photography at the moment is cold blackwater photography, where you go down at night with a big giant light. And the last thing I'd ever expect is a box jellyfish to show up. That would be, now I'm going to have a new kind of idea about this blackwater diving now.
Yeah, well, I see there's a lot of really cool photography people do off Japan of blackwater diving at night, and they get some really, really nice pictures of jellyfish. But yeah, as long as you're being safe, and it should be okay.
Full wetsuit, not like t-shirt and shorts like in the Philippines.
No, certainly not.
Ah, wow. And so if people did want to see jellyfish, we just mentioned like blackwater in Japan, but where else would people look for jellyfish in general?
The jellyfish are all over the place, really. Some days, like for a box jellyfish, if it's a cloudy day, because the clouds are reflecting off the ocean surface, it's almost impossible to find them. Unless you know where they occur, it's quite hard to find them most of the time.
Yeah. I know I've been like seeking photos of jellyfish for a long time, and you just happen to stumble across them randomly. That, or like, you're there at the beach without a camera and there's about 200 washed up and you're like, damn it.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And so before we kind of wrap up, have you got we've spoken about a lot of cool facts today, but have you got any cool facts for us about jellyfish?
Yeah, well, you can eat jellyfish actually. So there's some species that are actually targeted by fisheries, and people say that it's like salty, chewy noodles. I've never tried it myself. I definitely want to, but yeah, it doesn't sound terribly appetizing, but it's a big food staple in some Eastern countries.
Wow. I mean, there wouldn't be much protein in a jellyfish though, would there? I mean, given they're mainly water.
Yeah, they're mainly water. I don't think there's any nutritional benefit. I'm not too sure on that myself, but I can't see there being too much.
Uh, I had a fact that a group of jellyfish can actually be called a smack, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, so you can eat them. Are there any other cool facts? I know they have been known to bioluminesce as well, which means glow in the dark.
Yeah. Some of them do. Some of them do. It's quite a spectacle. It's really cool. The comb jellies, which aren't actually jellyfish, they're cousins of the jellyfish. They put on an incredible light show. And you should definitely check out a video. Everyone should check out a video. They're really cool.
Yeah, I'll make sure I post a link to the video on the Sea Creatures kind of website as well. But yeah, so tell us quickly what happens when the like comb jellies bioluminesce, and what do they kind of look like? Describe it for us.
Well, so they have the comb jellies along their sides. They have these cilia, which are these little hair-like structures. And as the light reflects through them, they kind of and they while they're moving, it's like a rainbow up and down the side. It's really cool. I don't know what the benefit of doing it is, but they look really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. I mean, comb jellies, they kind of look like an underwater banana in my kind of view without the skin. But I have no idea why they would have a light show given that they can't really see.
Yeah, sometimes they'll use light to attract prey. It's like in Finding Nemo when they're in the depths and they see that light and they go towards the light. It's a lot of that happens.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I know like animals like squid and so forth love light. So yeah, I can just picture squid getting trapped in a jellyfish. They're too curious to stay away.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, thanks very much for talking to us about jellyfish. And if anyone has any jellyfish related kind of questions, can they get in contact with you or what should they do?
Well, I have an Instagram that's jellyfish_science, and you can message me on there, and I'll happily answer any of your questions. And I also have a Twitter where I share my science updates, which is just Scott J Morrissey. So yeah, give them a follow if you're interested in anything jellyfish.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Sea Creatures Podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by myself, Matt Testoni. Production assistance by George McGrath, and music by the talented Dan Musil. If you've liked the show, jump onto our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/SeaCreaturesPodcast, or visit our Instagram, SeaCreatures_podcast. And if you've really liked the show, make sure you give us a rating on Spotify or Google or Apple or however you are listening to this podcast. Coming up next time on the Sea Creatures Podcast, we're going to be talking all about the legendary birds, the albatross, with Keith Reed, who has spent almost his entire life studying these amazing birds. This has been the Sea Creatures Podcast. Over and out.